Why Ford B unlocks the secrets of Custer's last stand in the sprawling and tragic saga of Custer's Last Stand. One pivotal location often fades into the background: the shallow crossing known as Ford B. While much of the focus has been on the chaotic and grim conclusion of the battle, the true turning point may lie in the crucial decisions General Custer made at this key crossing of the Little Bighorn River. Standing on the bluffs above Ford B, Custer's fate may have been determined not through dramatic charges or desperate stands, but in the calculated and perhaps flawed choices he made while contemplating a hazardous advance in an enemy-held territory. Ford B represents the intersection of strategy, reconnaissance, retreat, and fatal miscalculation, shedding light on the complexities of Custer's plan and the tragedy that followed. As the Battle of Little Bighorn reached its peak, General George Armstrong Custer and his cavalry stood atop Loose Ridge, with a vast expanse of the Little Bighorn Valley stretched before them. Beyond the ridge lay Ford B, a shallow crossing that would soon define the most critical moment of the battle. From this vantage point, Custer gazed out at the Sioux village in the distance, its scale only faintly visible. It was here, at this juncture of opportunity and peril, that the unfolding of Custer's destiny began. The decisions made in these fleeting minutes, shrouded in both mystery and controversy, determined whether his command would claim victory or, as history records, meet devastating defeat. The enigma of Custer's last stand continues to fuel speculation, amplified by conflicting reports and elusive details. For over a century, scholars, soldiers, and eyewitnesses have grappled with one pressing question: what was Custer's true intention after reaching Loose Ridge? Did he aim to gather critical intelligence, or was his plan an audacious assault on the village? Even among those who witnessed the battle, opinions were deeply divided. As Custer stood on Loose Ridge, his precise route and ultimate goal remained obscured by uncertainty. From the moment the battle ended, confusion reigned, with every account adding a new layer of intrigue. While the grim conclusion of Custer's command is well documented, the precise path he took, whether advancing, retreating, or reconsidering his options, remains hotly debated. Major Frederick Benteen's testimony only deepens the ambiguity. In a letter dated July 4, 1876, shortly after the battle, Benteen reflected on the debacle. None of Custer's command got into the village at all, he wrote, echoing a widely held belief. Yet earlier in the same letter, Benteen speculated that nearly all of the 5 companies got into the village but were driven out immediately. His vacillating views epitomized the chaos surrounding Custer's actions and the difficulty of reconstructing the battle with accuracy. Years later, during the 1879 Reno inquiry, Benteen adjusted his stance again, suggesting that Custer never reached Ford B, but instead bypassed it entirely by cutting across Loose and Nicartrite ridges. His evolving narrative contrasted sharply with Captain Edward Godfrey's steadfast belief that Custer had indeed attempted to cross at Ford B. This divergence between two seasoned military officers underscores the broader uncertainty surrounding the battle's key moments. Further complicating matters, theories emerged that tracks observed at Ford B were created by native warriors driving captured army horses across the river. Others posited that the tracks had been erased by the warriors themselves after annihilating Custer's command and pursuing Benteen and Reno's battalions. The confusion wasn't confined to military accounts. Native American warriors offered conflicting perspectives as well. In 1886, Captain Godfrey walked the battlefield with Gall, a Hunkpapa Lakota chief who had fought against Custer. Gall pointed out what he believed to be Custer's route, prompting Godfrey to recall a revelation. It then flashed upon me that I myself had seen Custer's trail on June 28th, while we were burying the dead. Godfrey recounted his discovery of shod horse tracks along a ridge that did not appear to lead toward Ford B, casting doubt on the prevailing theory that Custer had attempted a river crossing. While the trail's origin remained uncertain, Godfrey's observations highlighted the persistent mysteries surrounding Custer's final moments. Even with numerous shod horse tracks found at Ford B, their exact origins were impossible to verify, leaving historians to piece together an ever-elusive narrative. Ultimately, Ford B stands as a symbol of both strategic opportunity and catastrophic misjudgment. The events that unfolded at this shallow crossing offer a lens through which to explore the complexities of Custer's decisions, the chaos of the battle, and the enduring uncertainties that continue to captivate historians and enthusiasts alike. The enigma of Ford B and Custer's fateful decisions, adding another layer of complexity to the unfolding drama at Ford B, is the involvement of Gall, a key native warrior. Despite his significant role in the battle, Gall likely never witnessed Custer's movements firsthand. Based on detailed timelines, Gall and Iron Cedar departed the bluffs at approximately 2:29 p.m., just moments before Custer began ascending Loose Ridge at 2:32 p.m. By the time Gall reached the village around 2:39 p.m., Custer had only just arrived at the top of Loose Ridge. It was impossible for Gall to observe Custer's actions directly during these critical moments. Gall and his companions later gathered reinforcements and advanced toward Ford B, arriving at around 3:09 p.m., shortly after Custer had vacated the area. At Loose Ridge, Custer faced a crucial choice: press northward, approach the river, or attempt a bold and risky maneuver. Tracks leading toward the eventual killing ground suggested that parts of his force moved in that direction, while other tracks, possibly erased by native movements, led back into Medicine Tail Coulee or toward the river. Captain Edward Godfrey's reflections support the theory that Custer approached Ford B as part of a reconnaissance mission rather than a full-scale assault. To the surviving officers of the 7th Cavalry, the idea of Custer attempting a river crossing with his command scattered across the ridges seemed implausible. Sparse evidence of cavalry casualties and the inconclusive nature of the shod tracks only deepened the uncertainty. Insights from Native American warriors add further complexity. Gall's timeline aligns with Custer's crossing of Medicine Tail Coulee and his ascent of the Second Ridge, as described by Godfrey. However, Gall's perspective offered only limited clarity. Similarly, testimonies from warriors such as Shave Elk, Standing Bear, and Flying Hawk provide vivid but sometimes conflicting accounts. Shave Elk, for instance, described spotting Custer's column approaching the river, retreating to warn the village, and seeing a brief skirmish before the soldiers halted. Standing Bear recalled seeing Custer's dust trail from a distance, asserting that he made no significant attempt to cross the river. Flying Hawk echoed this, noting that Custer remained on the high ground rather than advancing to the riverbank. These native accounts, while essential pieces of the puzzle, fail to produce a unified narrative. The passage of time and the oral nature of their recollections further complicate the details. Still, they collectively suggest that Custer's movements near Ford B were cautious and calculated. His approach appears to have been reconnaissance-driven, as Godfrey concluded, rather than an aggressive push toward the village. Theories about Custer's intentions have long fueled speculation. Among the most debated is the notion that he planned a daring river crossing to launch a surprise assault. However, a closer examination of the terrain and battle timeline challenges this idea. Archaeologist Richard Fox's fatalistic theory posits that Custer aimed to strike decisively but was ambushed at Ford B. While dramatic, this theory lacks supporting evidence, such as signs of a large ambush or widespread disarray among Custer's forces. Testimonies from warriors like Waterman and Brave Wolf describe minor skirmishes, but do not indicate a catastrophic engagement at the ford. Moreover, the limited number of cavalry casualties near Ford B and the orderly distribution of bodies along ridges northward undermine the ambush hypothesis. Custer's arrival at the ford at approximately 2:55 p.m. and his departure around 3:05 p.m. further complicate the ambush theory. If his forces had been overwhelmed at Ford B, the battle would have concluded much sooner than the prolonged fighting that lasted until after 5 p.m. The absence of significant casualties at the ford, combined with the timeline, suggests that Custer's men moved away in an organized manner rather than retreating chaotically. Battlefield evidence also contradicts the idea of a sudden ambush. The placement of bodies, primarily scattered along the ridges leading to Calhoun Hill, indicates that Custer's forces advanced northward in a controlled manner. Even military contemporaries doubted the ambush theory. Tom Rosser, Custer's West Point classmate, dismissed the idea, arguing that an ambush column would have been forced back along its original route, not northward toward Calhoun Hill. This perspective reinforces the notion that Custer left Fort B voluntarily, in line with his strategic calculations. Custer's experience as a seasoned commander offers further insight. Having faced fierce Native American forces in the past, he understood the importance of gathering intelligence before committing to action. Charging blindly into an uncertain situation could be disastrous, and his movements near Fort B likely reflect a reconnaissance effort rather than an attack. From his vantage point on the bluffs, Custer would have seen the sprawling Sioux village below, its scale daunting. His decisions in those moments, whether to probe further, hold back, or reposition, remain shrouded in both strategic intent and historical ambiguity. The tragic outcome of Custer's command invites ongoing scrutiny. His actions at Fort B illustrate the fine line between bold initiative and fatal miscalculation, leaving a legacy that continues to intrigue historians and military analysts. While the full truth of his intentions may never be known, Fort B remains a critical focal point in understanding the complexities of Custer's last stand. Custer's calculated move from Fort B, dust rising from the valley below, signaled the movement of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of native families and warriors. Yet from his elevated vantage point, Custer could not fully grasp the sheer size of the forces arrayed against him. The river and bluffs obscured critical portions of the village, and the chaos of the scene made it difficult to discern whether the figures fleeing were warriors preparing for battle or non-combatants seeking safety. This uncertainty likely prompted Custer to approach Fort B cautiously, refraining from an immediate assault. Insights from native warriors observing his movements shed light on his strategy. Standing Bear, for instance, stated that Custer descended the ridge but made no attempt to cross the river, suggesting that Custer was probing the village's defenses, assessing the feasibility of a larger attack. The limited resistance encountered at Fort B likely reinforced Custer's decision to press further north, where he could regroup and evaluate his next steps. By this point, his tactical situation had grown increasingly precarious. A significant portion of his command remained dispersed along the ridges behind him, making a coordinated assault unfeasible. Only part of his force had reached the bluffs overlooking the river, while others navigated the challenging terrain. Launching an attack under such disorganized conditions would have been reckless. Instead, Fort B presented Custer with an opportunity to gather intelligence rather than engage in a decisive action. Another factor influencing Custer's decision was the condition of his horses. According to military reports, the animals were agitated and difficult to control, adding another layer of complexity to organizing an effective river crossing or charge. Godfrey later described the confusion within the ranks caused by the horses' excitability, which compounded the disorder among Custer's men. In light of these challenges, reconnaissance at Fort B became an essential preliminary step before any potential larger maneuver. After roughly 10 minutes evaluating the situation, Custer made the pivotal decision to head north, leaving Fort B behind to seek a better vantage point or reconnect with his scattered command. By around 3:05 p.m., Custer and his men began moving toward the ridges above Medicine Tail Coulee. His approach during this phase of the battle demonstrated a strategy of reconnaissance by force, rather than committing to a full-scale attack. Custer appeared to be drawing warriors out of the village to reveal their strength and positions. Moving northward may have been a calculated attempt to project the illusion of a larger force advancing, enticing the warriors to engage on more favorable ground. Native testimony supports this interpretation. According to Two Eagles, Custer's men were mounted as they descended the ridges toward Fort B, but refrained from heavy fighting, focusing instead on probing the village's defenses. Custer was undoubtedly aware of the mounting threat posed by warriors gathering along the eastern ridges of the river. Reports indicate that approximately 50 mounted warriors, led by Cheyenne Braves Wolf Tooth and Bigfoot, were advancing toward his rear, creating the risk of cutting off his escape route and severing communication with his scattered command. To counter this, Captain Miles Keogh ordered his men to fire on the approaching warriors, providing critical cover for Custer's movement northward. While retreating from Fort B carried its own risks, it was a calculated move. By heading to higher ground, Custer aimed to better survey the village layout and assess the strength of the opposing forces. At the same time, he created a buffer between his men and the advancing warriors, giving his command a chance to regroup. A persistent misconception is that Custer intended to launch an assault on the village from Fort B. However, evidence overwhelmingly suggests otherwise. The timeline of events, the light resistance encountered at the ford, and the distribution of casualties all indicate that Custer's objective was reconnaissance rather than a direct attack. Custer's position at Fort B posed significant logistical challenges. With over half his command trailing behind and the village still partially obscured by dust and terrain, he lacked the manpower and visibility to execute a coordinated assault. The limited response from native warriors at the ford further implies that they did not perceive Custer's presence as an immediate threat. If an attack had been imminent, a more robust defense would have been expected. Thus, Custer's decision to move northward reflected a tactical necessity rather than an intent to engage the village from Fort B. As the Battle of Little Bighorn unfolded, the critical moments between Custer's arrival at Fort B and his northward advance became the focal point of heated debate. Understanding this phase requires precise attention to timing and geography. Was Custer's northward movement merely a reaction to the growing native forces nearby, or was it part of a larger, more deliberate strategy? Custer reached the bluffs above Fort B around 2:55 p.m., marking a pivotal moment in the battle. From this elevated position, he could partially survey the sprawling Sioux village below, although dust and terrain continued to obscure key details. After approximately 10 minutes of assessment, Custer began his northward advance at 3:05 p.m., leaving Fort B behind. This decision highlighted his recognition of the need to find higher ground or consolidate his forces scattered along the ridges behind him. The movements at Fort B were not the actions of a reckless attacker, but of a commander adapting to the chaotic and rapidly changing battlefield. Whether his decision to move north reflected a larger strategy or a reaction to immediate threats remains one of the enduring questions surrounding Custer's fateful last stand. Custer's brief stop at Fort B. A tactical reconnaissance. Custer's time at Fort B was fleeting, lasting no more than 10 minutes, with no evidence to suggest an attempted river crossing or a major engagement. Instead, his actions during this period were focused on surveying the village and the surrounding terrain. Accounts from Native American warriors reinforced this interpretation. Shave Elk, an Oglala warrior, recounted seeing Custer's column approach the river, only to halt briefly before being attacked. According to Shave Elk, the soldiers descended into the coulee toward the river, paused momentarily, and were then met by the advancing native forces. This account aligns with the notion that Custer's presence at Fort B was not aggressive but rather a reconnaissance mission. The limited skirmishes that occurred at Fort B lacked the intensity of a decisive battle, further supporting the idea that Custer did not view the ford as a critical objective. Instead, it seems Fort B was part of a larger plan to gather intelligence and identify a more advantageous position. Custer's approach exemplified the concept of reconnaissance by force, where small, calculated actions were used to probe enemy defenses and gauge their strength and positions. This strategy aimed to provoke a response from the native warriors, forcing them out of the village and into a more vulnerable position. By moving northward from Fort B, Custer likely intended to project the illusion of a larger force advancing, thereby compelling the warriors to engage on ground more favorable to his command. The testimony of Two Eagles, a Cubral Sioux warrior, offers additional insight into this phase of the battle. Two Eagles described Custer's men as mounted and moving down the ridges toward Fort B, but noted no significant engagement. His account supports the view that Custer's actions were primarily observational, focused on gathering information rather than launching an attack. As Custer's command advanced northward, the threats around him escalated. A contingent of approximately 50 mounted warriors, led by the Cheyenne braves Wolf Tooth and Bigfoot, began closing in on Custer's rear. This posed a critical danger, as it threatened to sever Custer's escape route and disrupt communication with his dispersed forces. In response, Captain Miles Keogh ordered his men to fire on the advancing warriors, a decisive action that provided the necessary cover for Custer's continued northward movement. Keogh's quick thinking and the disciplined volleys from his troops helped to prevent a catastrophic collapse of the rear guard, allowing Custer to maintain the initiative despite his increasingly precarious position. To safeguard his flanks, Custer employed skirmishers, a critical element of his tactical approach. Lieutenant Algernon Smith and his Gray Horse Troop were tasked with protecting the flanks of the column. Positioned in a dismounted skirmish line, Smith's men acted as a defensive screen, prepared to repel any native forces attempting to flank Custer's command. This maneuver allowed Custer to maintain a defensive posture while continuing his reconnaissance. By using skirmishers effectively, Custer ensured his forces would not be caught off guard, enabling him to probe the native defenses without overcommitting to a large-scale engagement. The role of Smith's skirmishers is corroborated by accounts from native warriors who witnessed the battle. Brave Wolf, a northern Cheyenne warrior, observed how the soldiers deployed and advanced quickly toward the river, providing essential protection for Custer's column as it moved north. This defensive strategy not only preserved the cohesion of Custer's command, but also kept the native forces at bay, allowing him to proceed with his reconnaissance mission. By approximately 3:07 p.m., Custer's command had moved beyond Ford B and was making its way toward Calhoun Hill. This elevated position offered a superior vantage point to observe the village and monitor the movements of the native forces. Calhoun Hill also provided a defensible location where Custer could regroup and plan his next move. Despite widespread misconceptions, there is little evidence to suggest that Custer intended to launch an assault on the village from Ford B. The timeline of events, the limited resistance encountered, and the strategic use of reconnaissance tactics all point to a more measured approach. Custer's movements reflected his attempt to understand the strength and positioning of the opposing forces while maintaining flexibility to adapt to the rapidly changing battlefield. As the battle unfolded, Ford B proved to be a stepping stone in Custer's broader strategy, a point where reconnaissance, not confrontation, defined his actions. The events at Ford B highlight Custer's effort to gain critical intelligence while minimizing risk, a calculated approach that ultimately set the stage for the tragic and chaotic events that followed. The move to Calhoun Hill and the unfolding tragedy. Custer's decision to relocate to Calhoun Hill was informed by several pressing considerations. First, he sought a vantage point that would provide a clearer view of the village and its surroundings. At Ford B, dust clouds and the chaos of the moment had obscured much of the native forces' movements. Calhoun Hill offered not only an elevated perspective, but also the chance to rally his scattered command. With the growing threat from the east, it was imperative for Custer to secure a defensible position. His northward movement reflected a cautious strategy, focused on reconnaissance and maintaining the initiative without committing to a full-scale engagement. From the high ground, he could monitor the native warriors' movements and decide whether to advance or retreat. This deliberate, measured approach was consistent with his broader strategy of using reconnaissance by force to gather critical intelligence. Custer's tactics during this phase demonstrate a calculated response to rapidly evolving circumstances. Often criticized as reckless, Custer's actions suggest he was making informed decisions based on the limited information at his disposal. His withdrawal from Ford B and movement toward Calhoun Hill was a strategic choice, enabling him to better assess the situation while securing a stronger position. The deployment of skirmishers along his flanks and covering fire from Keogh's men further showcased his effort to maintain control of his command amidst rising threats. These actions allowed Custer to continue his reconnaissance mission while avoiding immediate entanglement with the enemy. As Custer reached Calhoun Hill, the battle's intensity escalated dramatically. Native forces, now better organized and emboldened by their success against Reno's troops, began closing in from multiple directions. Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and other influential leaders orchestrated a relentless assault, leaving Custer with increasingly limited options. The move to Calhoun Hill, while tactically sound, soon turned into a desperate bid to stave off an encirclement. What followed was not a simple slaughter, but a series of decisions shaped by necessity, as Custer's command faced mounting pressure from overwhelming numbers. Despite his efforts to regroup, Custer's forces were progressively pushed back. The wide, open ridges offered little natural cover, and the soldiers were forced into small, disorganized skirmishes. The use of skirmishers, which had previously helped protect Custer's column, proved inadequate against the sheer number of warriors. Lieutenant Algernon Smith's Gray Horse Troop and other units attempted to hold the high ground, but were overwhelmed by native fighters adept in guerrilla tactics. The lack of cohesion among Custer's troops compounded the difficulty of organizing an effective defense. Native testimonies vividly capture the ferocity of these final moments. White Shield, a northern Cheyenne warrior, described seeing the Gray Horse Troop dismount and prepare to make a stand. His account highlights the soldiers' determination, even in the face of insurmountable odds. Brave Wolf, another Cheyenne warrior, recalled how Custer's men initially formed a line of battle near the river, but were soon forced to retreat to higher ground. Similarly, Waterman, an Arapaho warrior, recounted seeing soldiers attempt to charge, only to be driven back by a fierce native counterattack. Pretty White Buffalo, a Hunkpapa woman who witnessed the battle, described the withering fire that greeted Custer's troops as they advanced. Her account underscores the intensity of the native resistance and the near impossibility of holding ground under such circumstances. By 4 p.m., the battle reached its tragic climax. Custer's command was effectively cut off, with no hope of retreat or reinforcement. Surrounded on all sides, his forces were subjected to unrelenting attacks. As the soldiers' defensive positions collapsed, they were forced into close-quarters combat, fighting desperately in small, isolated groups. The battlefield became a scene of chaos, with bodies scattered across the ridges, a stark testament to the disintegration of Custer's once cohesive command. Lieutenant Miles Keogh, one of Custer's most trusted officers, made valiant efforts to rally the remaining troops. However, even his leadership could not stem the tide. The native forces, coordinated and numerically superior, pressed their advantage relentlessly. Casualties mounted on both sides, but the weight of numbers heavily favored the native warriors. The final collapse of Custer's command was not a sudden rout, but a gradual erosion of order and discipline under the relentless assault. The mythologized image of Custer's last stand, a heroic and doomed defense, belies the chaotic reality of his final moments. Native accounts and battlefield evidence suggest no singular, cohesive stand, but rather a series of desperate skirmishes. White Shield described how the warriors pursued soldiers up a long slope, driving them further from the river and into a final, desperate position on what is now known as Custer Hill. The soldiers' scattered bodies reflect the disarray of their defense, while the relatively low number of native casualties underscores the tactical advantage held by the warriors, who skillfully used the terrain and coordinated their attacks. The exact moment of Custer's death remains an enduring mystery. Some accounts suggest he fell early in the fighting, while others depict him issuing orders until the very end. What is certain is that he died alongside his men, his body found among a small group on Custer Hill. His death has since been mythologized. Some portray him as a tragic hero, others as a reckless leader whose misjudgments doomed his command. The truth lies somewhere in between. Custer was an experienced officer who underestimated the size and resolve of the native forces, and his decisions during the battle were shaped by the chaotic and unpredictable nature of the conflict. The Battle of Little Bighorn remains one of the most studied and debated events in American history. For Custer, the battle was both his most infamous defeat and a defining moment of his legacy. The victory for the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes was short-lived, as it intensified the U.S. government's efforts to subjugate the Plains tribes. For better or worse, Custer's name is forever linked to the tragedy of the Little Bighorn, a symbol of both the heroism and hubris of the American frontier. His actions at Ford B, Calhoun Hill, and beyond continue to serve as a lens through which to understand the complexities of this iconic chapter in American history. Thank you for watching the video until the end. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any new videos from us. What do you think about today's topic? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found the video helpful, feel free to share it with your friends and family. We hope you had a great time. See you in the next video with even more exciting content. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out.